Hi, I'm Scott Weinberg, and welcome to The Lawyer's View. Gun control and violent crimes. Should we allow everyone who wants to carry a gun to tote them around in their purse? What protections should we have as a public against the individuals that come into our theater and start shooting automatic weapons? What goes into defending someone accused of a violent crime? Well, those questions and more we're going to get answers to when we come back on The Lawyer's View. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Lawyer's View. Why is it that when anyone mentions the words gun control, everyone, liberals and conservatives alike, they get the hair on the back of their necks standing on end? But when that violence takes place, like recently in Colorado, and it hits the news, every parent, every child, every grandparent, everyone who wants to protect their loved ones, they start to ask, are we doing enough to protect ourselves? Are we safe in public places from anyone who threatens or is carrying a gun? Well, today we're going to talk about that, and we're joined by two top-notch criminal lawyers right here in Michigan. First, let's say hello to Steen Gran, who's been practicing law for many, many years, who's had hundreds of cases involving these type of offenders, gun and violent offenders. Thanks for being here. And Nicole Casca, another great attorney here in Michigan. Thanks for joining us here. Okay,
Thanks, Scott.
So we've been talking about gun control because it's all over the news. And we've represented, all three of us, thousands of people who have been charged with violent crimes using guns. Steen, do you think that gun control is going to change whether or not our clients are going to have guns or not in any of these violent crimes?
It's not going to change whether our clients have guns or not. They're too accessible on the streets. Gun control would make it more difficult to get certain types of weapons off the street.
Like, I mean, automatic weapons. Why do these people need to be able to get automatic weapons easily? I mean, you know, Nicole, we were talking about it before the show. You can buy these things on the internet. You can buy them at Walmart. I mean, you can buy them anywhere. Is it going to protect the public by stopping their ability to buy these things?
No, because they're still going to be available. You have so many access points on the streets, as well as other persons selling, like, you know, the garage sales. I mean, I was just at a garage sale last weekend in Grosse Pointe, and there were 3 guns, one being an AK-47 for sale. They were selling out of their garage. And
I'm not sure you should be able to buy an AK-47 at a garage sale.
You shouldn't. And you shouldn't, the public, there should be some type of protocol that you should be able to have to petition to get something like that. I mean, it doesn't go against our amendment right, our Second Amendment right to bear arms. But do you have a right to bear an AK-47? Or, I mean, I don't think that's what it applies to.
You know, we've always had clients too that, let's say they're stopped at a vehicle, they've got a handgun. Let's forget about the automatic weapon for a second. So they've got a handgun in the car. And first, do you need a CCW? You need a carry and concealed weapon to license to carry a handgun in a car?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how many people have that? I mean, how many times we represented people where they don't have the weapon? Right. Actually, they don't have the license, but they think it's okay to carry the weapon. They really do. And then they're shocked that when they're arrested and charged with, you know, a 5-year felony, for having a weapon in the car.
The vast majority of people who carry weapons in cars in this state do not have a concealed weapons permit and are doing so illegally. A lot of them know it's illegal, and some of them actually believe they're following the law because they've registered the handgun and they're not, in their minds, committing any crime.
You know, when you have a police officer too, I mean, when a police officer comes up to a car, they don't know who's in the car, they don't know what's going on. You know, we've had many police officers on the stand, and many times I feel for their safety too. They're coming up, and there are crazy people that come out and just shoot them. I mean, they don't know what's going on. So there's a law, and tell me if I'm wrong, that when you come up to a vehicle, a police officer, and you're in the car, you have to inform them if you have the gun in the car.
You're supposed to.
Right. And
That's
if you
a requirement.
don't, that's a charge in itself.
Correct.
But are we really looking at offenders and all the people that you guys have represented do people that you represent register the guns? Are they taking the CCW classes? Are those the ones that we are afraid of? Or is it the ones that don't bother to do that and are illegally carrying these weapons?
I also think what we need to be worried about is the convicted felons who have not even bothered to try to restore their rights with the county gun board.
Tell us about that. How does that work?
Well, once you're convicted of a felony, you lose your right to be able to even have a weapon, a firearm of any sort, let alone be able to have a carrying concealed weapon permit. You have to petition the gun board in the in the county that you live in to see if you can have your rights restored.
And it's after 5 years, right?
Correct. You have to wait a minimum of 5 years.
Do they ever restore those rights?
Very rarely.
Because I've never seen them restore those
I've only
rights.
seen one client do that, and
Right.
that was strictly after he had gotten the expungement and then went back to the gun board because he was a security officer,
Right.
a late night security officer. So that was why he needed to be able to carry a gun.
But that still won't protect you because you still haven't gotten your federal firearms rights restored.
True.
And the office that does that in D.C. hasn't had anyone working in the office to even evaluate the petitions for at least 5 years. So you can't get your federal firearms rights restored. So you could petition the gun board, get your right to have the concealed weapon, get your permit issued here in Michigan. You could get arrested and charged, then federally, and go to prison.
But, you know, my feeling is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I always see it that the responsible people that are going for these types of certifications, they're not the ones we have to worry about. You know, when we have, let's say, domestic violence cases, how many times have you seen someone who legally has a weapon use that weapon in a domestic violence situation for even just a misdemeanor domestic violence, let alone a serious one? Do you find that that's the case?
I have not seen that yet in my
Very,
practice.
very rarely.
Right. It's usually the ones that
It's
the biggest
illegal.
problem that I see in domestic violence is the substance abuse. You get people that are drunk or they're stoned or something's going on, and that is what is the violence that we're seeing, not necessarily with a weapon. Do you see it differently?
No, I completely agree.
Because I think that the people that are actually going and legitimately under the Second Amendment possessing firearms and going to the classes are not always the ones we're worried about. I mean, we talk about this recent case in Colorado. You know, he bought all his stuff, at the local stores, right?
Correct.
And then he bought
some on the internet,
on the internet.
just a couple clicks away.
Yes.
It was so easy. Do you really think could gun control have prevented what happened in Colorado?
It could have prevented him from having such easy access to the weapons. It would have prevented him from getting certain types of weapons. It would have prevented him from getting the body armor. It would have prevented him from getting the armor-piercing bullets that he ordered on the internet
And
then he used.
But he could have done other things. I mean, he had bombs in his house, right, in his apartment. He could have, instead of used guns, what prevents anybody from going, because we have an open society, to taking a bomb or a grenade and walking into a public place? We can't prevent people from being hurt, and but especially people with mental illness we can't prevent them from actually getting guns. And that's the thing that we want to talk about too, is with mental illness, that is about how we can prevent someone who has a history of mental illness to potentially have a gun. But the problem with that, isn't it, that we have to have someone who's sought treatment for the mental illness.
Correct.
We don't go and have everybody who applies for a license for a gun have a psychological exam, do we?
No.
Do you think we should?
I don't think it would hurt.
I think it would help, but we don't treat mental illness here in Michigan. The #1 mental health provider in the state of Michigan is the county jail system.
That's ridiculous.
And that is not the place to start mental health treatment. That's the reason so many people end up in the criminal justice system, because they're mentally ill, they don't have access to treatment and medication, but they either self-medicate with illegal drugs, they have access to a weapon on the street, they commit a crime, lives are destroyed, and they're in jail. Had they been given simple treatment or medication, the tragedy would never have occurred in the first place.
Do you find that with your clients that actually end up going to jail, that there's any substance abuse treatment that they get that might be better than obviously the mental health treatment? Do they treat people in the jail for substance abuse?
It depends on the county, and it depends on the program,
Right.
because counties have finally started realizing it's a lot cheaper to treat someone for the mental health or the substance abuse issues that they have, so that when they get out, they don't reoffend. They don't get back on the way. They don't get back into the substance abuse issues. It saves families. It saves jobs. It saves people from being injured, and it's a benefit to the society, and it's a lot cheaper that way. They spend a lot less dollars of the taxpayer if they treat the substance abuse issue versus having the person reoffend, commit another crime, and have to incarcerate them all over again.
Especially violent crimes. When we come back, we're going to talk about trying these type of cases and basically the defense that probably is going to come in with this, quote, joker crime in Colorado. We'll ask our two experts about that. Stay tuned.
It's time for Inhaler Wrestling! Tonight's match, CFC Inhalers, the polluting inhalers of yesterday, take on CFC Free Inhalers! CFC Free Inhalers come out with a massive puffer pop-pop, followed immediately by a flawless Inhaler Impaler!
These CFC Free Inhalers are the smart choice for asthma management, Jack. I mean, just look at their moves.
Ask your doctor about the new inhalers, and call or visit the American Lung Association online to learn more.
Welcome back to the show. James Holmes walks into a movie theater, the midnight show of Batman, dressed in SWAT attire, automatic weapon, and starts firing into the crowd. Now that he's caught, everybody wants to know, what is his defense going to be? We're joined here again by Steve Grant and Nicole Casca, two top-notch criminal lawyers, and isn't that what everybody's going to be talking about? What is the defense going to be? What is really an insanity defense? Nicole, tell us, what is an insanity defense and how can you try to use that?
Well, the insanity defense in Michigan, it's not just having mental illness or mental retardation. The person has to not be able to appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct and not really be able to conform to the laws of society.
But that's a really high standard in Michigan, too.
It is.
It's really hard to do.
We used to have diminished capacity, but they did away with that. What was it, 2000? I think it was 2000 that finally
People
did away
versus
with that.
Carpenter.
Right. And
But
and
it's
that
hard to
allowed-
meet that standard.
It's very hard to meet that standard. And in fact, many times when the state has their expert, their forensic expert, examine the defendant, but 9 times out of 10 they find them not insane at the time of the offense.
Right, in Michigan they have to go through a forensic exam, right?
Correct.
And they go to the Psychodiagnostic Center in Ypsilanti.
Correct.
And they'll be interviewed by basically doctors that work for the state.
Yes.
And 9 times out of 10, you say, they're going to find that they are legally sane.
Correct.
Even if they have, right, a history of mental illness.
Not just a history of mental illness, they could have been hearing voices at the time. As long as they can understand that, for example, shooting a theater full of people was wrong, Michigan law is going to say that you were in fact sane and you don't have a mental illness.
So if you have someone, let's say that you have someone who has a violent crime, not even this necessarily this guy in Colorado, but there's a violent crime, a shooting, and he says, you know, an evil spirit or God, I heard God's voice and he told me or she told me to shoot this person or beat this person up. Could that rise to the level of insane in Michigan? Legal insanity?
You would need more than that, frankly, in order to rise to the level of insanity.
It doesn't seem like it should. It seems like that's too high of a standard. That
I
someone,
agree.
if they're hearing voices and it's really legitimate, that should mean that they should be declared legally insane, if nothing else, to have them put in a position where they can be treated. But, you know, let's say that's even for competency, right? There's a difference between culpability, right? You can't form the requisite intent to commit the crime, but you are not necessarily competent to stand trial. We were just talking about that, right? Where someone might not be because, let's say, they have Alzheimer's, or they're not able to understand what's going on in the actual courtroom, but they might not be legally insane, but they're not competent. Have you seen that happen?
That happens all the time. The level of competency is a different standard. It means, do I understand what the charge is? Do I understand that this person here is my lawyer, the person up there is the judge, the person over there is prosecuting me? That's the level of competency. Many, many times with the mentally ill, they can't rise to that level. Once they don't grasp those concepts, they're sent to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry, which is in Ypsilanti, where they treat the person, they medicate the person, and try to get them competent within the 16th window.
16 months.
16 months is what they have.
15.
15. I'm
So
sorry.
what happens if
15
they
months.
can't get them competent, where they understand that we're the lawyers, there's a judge there, what they're on trial for? What happens after the 15 months?
They're involuntarily committed.
So then they're just stuck away.
They're sent to a mental institution for a long term.
Yeah.
If they cannot get them competent within 16 months. And generally, on most cases, the charges are dismissed because the person is not going to be getting out of the forensic center or the long-term placement facility that they're in.
So two different types of standards, right? There's the standard for the competency to get the defendant or the offender to understand what's going on in the courtroom, what's going on with everybody's roles, what he's charged with. And then once that happens, there's also culpability, right? Where now you're going to be able to plead or deal with the insanity plea. Do you think of what you know now, what's going on in Colorado, that might be a viable type of defense for this guy?
It's a defense I would explore, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure.
But you mentioned that, of course, the state has their own, and I'm sure Colorado has probably a similar system, where they have their own state system and psychodiagnostic center set up where they do those types of evaluations. But the defense, we get to do it, right?
Yes, we do. We
Have
do
you-
get to ask for an independent
So have you done that
examination.
before, an
Yes, I
independent
have.
exam?
Yes, and in fact, that's how you finally get to a full-blown hearing where you have your expert versus the state expert. And basically, it's, in the competency to stand trial hearing, that's where the two experts, basically the battle of the experts to convince the judge, whether or not the defendant is, competent to stand trial at that point. And then you can move to the next step, which is whether there is, the culpability issue as to, criminal responsibility.
And that's more about in front of the jury, right?
Correct.
So have you argued and won cases where a jury would come back and say, guilty but mentally ill?
That's not a win.
No.
That is an absolute verdict in Michigan, but that is a lose.
It is,
If you
because
have-
then they still get sent away.
They get sent away. They go to the Michigan Department of Corrections. They get sent to Jackson, and then they eventually are put in there's a prison in Jackson, Dwayne Waters Psychiatric Hospital, which is where they all stay.
So what would you consider a win as criminal defense attorneys if you have that insanity defense?
Not guilty.
by reason of insanity.
Not guilty by reason of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think what you know of that could be possible with this guy, or we just don't know enough of what was going on?
We don't know enough. I mean, I haven't heard enough information come out about his background as far as history of mental illness, but suggesting the circumstances of the crime that was committed, I just don't find that a sane person would have walked in to that movie theater with the gas, with the tear gas, with the goggles and the gas mask.
A lot of premeditation here.
Yes.
Right? For
Yeah.
weeks drawing up to this, buying the weapons, preparing yourself, getting all the SWAT gear,
Correct. The body armor. Yes.
coming up with your escape. His plan, it sounds like the escape was, of course, to dress up like the people coming in, the gear, the police coming in, and of course he had some people that found him.
Right.
Does that premeditation to you mean that he is less likely or more likely to be considered sane?
I think it's going to make it much harder on an insanity offense to actually win, because it shows, as you said, a lot of forethought, thinking and planning ahead. If you're truly mentally ill, you don't have that planning capabilities.
We get it, I get it, and I'm sure you guys have it, where just lay people will come to you. And it's pretty rare to get such a horrific case like this, a mass murderer. But when you have any type of what other people would say, it's a despicable crime, and yet we're asked, how can we represent someone like that? This public defender, it's my understanding the head public defender in this area in Colorado, of course, is taking on the case. Do you guys ever get that? that you feel that people come up to you and say, how can you represent such a despicable person?
It happens every single day of my career.
So what do you
for
say?
18 years. I am happy to say that I'm a criminal defense attorney, that the Constitution that protects you and I protects everyone in this country. And as long as you have good people on both sides, and I make sure the law is upheld, I have faith in the system. It's the best system we have on the planet. And I'm proud to be a criminal defense attorney because I love the Constitution, and I want to make sure that it's upheld for everyone.
And it's really true that, of course we're lawyers, but the prosecutor are lawyers, the judges are lawyers. Right. We're playing different roles, and many times they switch. I used to be a prosecutor and defense attorney. Many times you switch different roles, and you take on that responsibility of the role that you're playing. But we are trained the same way. We all go to law school.
Right.
We all have that sense of we want to protect individuals and are also the public under the Constitution. I mean, do you ever, when you're talking to a jury, do you explain that to them? That what your role is and why you're doing this?
Or why I feel it's important.
Yeah.
I think they need to know that. Because a lot of times the juries will come in, they have a preconceived notion. They're already thinking that just because somebody's been charged with a crime, that they're guilty. So you have to get past that hurdle. So
That's a huge hurdle sometimes.
It's a huge hurdle, but everyone walks in with preconceived notions.
They do.
You've got to jump that. And when they see that there's a human element to your client, when they see that this is a person and you believe in that person and you're fighting for them, and you explain your role to them and why it's so important for them to listen, to be a participant in this case, to be actively listening, then I think they start to get it. And then by the end of the case, they are in it as much as you are. And they realize how important their role is, not just that they got called for jury duty and they're getting screwed out of 2 days of work,
But how could someone in this case, in any popular case, any famous case, infamous case, like this case will be, how really can they get a fair